Last time we were looking at the relationship of Cleopatra and Julius Caesar. I think we saw how she had become pregnant as she was giving him a tour of Egypt, and they had a son that they named Caesarion. I think I related to you how Caesar went back home to his wife, but almost immediately called for Cleopatra and his new son to join him in Rome, where he set up a statue of Cleopatra in the temple of Isis, causing people to wonder if Caesar was not also making himself a god. This, of course, caused a lot of controversy in Rome. People were very much dissatisfied over the fact that Julius Caesar had brought this queen of Egypt to live there so openly with him, especially being that he was married. But Caesar responded by declaring himself dictator for life. Now, you know that under the Roman Republic there was a provision for appointing someone dictator for a period of time, like 6 months, in order to handle a particular crisis. But now Julius Caesar is taking over as dictator, and he's declaring himself, aside from the Senate, to be dictator for life. Now, he did accomplish many reforms, which I want us to consider. First of all, he curbed the corruption of the provincial governments. Remember, we saw before that there had been a lot of corruption throughout the Roman Republic, and especially in the provinces, and he did what he could to eliminate that. Secondly, he established colonies for the landless army veterans. This was important because when men retired from the army, many of them had nowhere to go. And what you don't want is a bunch of army veterans roaming around with nothing to do. That's just a recipe for trouble. And so he established colonies for these retired men to settle in, so they have land, that have a place to go. One of those colonies, by the way, was Philippi, named after Philip of Macedon, who was the father of Alexander the Great. He had conquered that city coming down from Macedonia and had named it after himself. But Julius Caesar made it a Roman colony, and in fact, to the extent that if you were a citizen of Philippi, you were considered a citizen of Rome. And so the people there had the rights of Roman citizens. This becomes something that's important for us to understand when we see the Apostle Paul coming into Philippi years later in Acts chapter 16. He is there, and he is imprisoned, remember, and beaten before he's put in prison. And of course that night there's earthquake, the cells are opened, and the Philippian jailer, who is probably a retired Roman soldier himself, is concerned that he is going to lose his life if the prisoners escape, and he cries out, "What must I do to be saved?" And Paul says, "Believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, and you will be saved and your household." And so the man believed, he and his household believed and were baptized, and he washed the wounds of Paul, and finds out that Paul is a Roman citizen. And the Roman citizens were not allowed to be beaten without a trial and thrown in jail. And so the officials of the city are very concerned, and so they want Paul to kind of go out the back door and so long, don't come back. But Paul says, "Oh no, you brought us in, you beat us publicly, you brought us in publicly, you're going to take us out publicly." And that gave a good precedence then for the believers in that church as being established there in Philippi to know that the officials are not going to act against them either, because it made such a mistake with Paul. And then when Paul writes to the Philippians, in the letter to the Philippians, there are a number of references there that are more understandable if you know that Philippi was considered a Roman colony with the rights of Roman citizens. So Julius Caesar is the one who did this. You can see that that would, of course, endear him to the army veterans. Thirdly, he granted citizenship to many non-Italians living in Rome's new colonies, in particular the Gauls. Now, originally, to be a Roman citizen meant that you were a resident of Rome. Then it came to include people on the Italian peninsula. But now Julius Caesar extended that into the province areas and the areas that they conquered. And now he's allowing people there to be considered Roman citizens. So he is greatly expanding. He's broadening the base of those that are Roman citizens. And of course, being that he proclaims that to be true, those citizens then are on his side. So he is developing a larger and larger clientele, if you will, of people that can serve him and support him. Fourthly, he initiated many public work programs, so building roads, building aqueducts, baths, things like that. And of course, that always benefits people, and they're glad that that is done. Next, he established the calendar. That's the basis of our 365 and a fourth day year. Prior to this, calendars were lunar based on the phase of the moon, and so you always had, you ran out of days before the end of the year, and you've got these extra days. And so if you go totally lunar, eventually you're going to, your month is going to be a totally different time of year than what it was before. Julius Caesar established a solar calendar based on the amount of days it takes for the Earth to go around the sun. So that was quite an innovation.
Why so against
Because the exact time that it takes for the Earth to go around the sun is actually 365 and a fourth days. That's why every 4 years we add a day to make up for that fourth of a day that occurs every year. And that's called leap year. Yeah. In fact, I think this year's a leap year, isn't it? Yeah. So every 4 years we have a February the 29th to catch us back up again. All right, next he gave full citizenship for Romans whose rights have been denied under Sulla. So he's reversing some of the things that Sulla had done. Again, he's gaining popularity with all this. Next, he abolished the trade and social guilds. Why? Well, these were like trade unions back then. It's the closest thing we have today. And sometimes these people that were members of a particular guild would get together and they would get upset about something and they get angry, and so then pretty soon there's a mob, doing something. And so he just said, we're not going to have any of that. So he just outlawed them. And so these groups did not exist. Next, he required that plantation labor forces be at least 1/3 freemen. Now, why do you think he did that?
So the slaves don't vote.
So the slaves what?
Don't vote.
I can't understand what you're saying. Revolt. Now, I wasn't concerned about slave revolt. There had been one earlier under Spartacus, but that was put down. Who would this benefit? If he says that on plantations you have to have at least 1/3 of the workers be freemen. Bill?
People getting votes, so they can vote.
Not really voting.
People getting jobs.
Yeah. So remember, slaves had taken away a lot of the employment opportunities for people. So he's requiring that at least 1/3 of your workforce has to be freemen. That means you have to hire people, and that increases employment.
Oh, I don't understand that at first.
Got it? Understand now?
I thought they only had like 1/3 of their rights.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
No. The labor forces are at least 1/3 freemen, made up of a freeman.
I don't know.
Yes,
I had a question about labor
it's Friday.
I know, I have a question.
Well, let's wait till the end, okay? Next, there are term limits established of 2 years for governors of the provinces and 1 year for praetorians. Now, why would it be an advisable thing to have a term limit for governors and provinces? Why would Julius Caesar enact that? Bill?
So they don't get too much power.
Exactly. Because if a guy's out there, way out there in some province someplace, and he's there for 10 years, he gets more and more power, more and more control, builds up an army, and then before you know it, maybe he's rebelling against the Roman government or against Julius Caesar himself. So he puts a 2-year limit. So that's enough time to get things done, but not enough time to gain a lot of power. That's exactly right. So, can you, what's your impression about these reforms that Julius Caesar enacted? Made it more popular with a lot of different people. What else? Right?
He might make some plantation owners only though, because having to hire a certain amount of people.
Yeah, that's true. But if he makes one plantation owner unhappy, he has made a whole bunch of freemen happy. So it's a 1 to a bunch ratio. So he comes out ahead, right, as far as popularity goes. Now, he's not concerned about being popular with the Senate. You can see some of these things go against the Senate, including this one, because the senators are the ones who own most of the plantations. So the Senate doesn't like him very well, but everybody else likes Julius Caesar. Now, do you think he was pretty smart in enacting these things? Yeah, he had a lot of foresight. He knew what needed to be done in order to accomplish what he wanted. But the senators themselves were concerned. You know, they were concerned that he was making himself into a god. He had declared himself dictator for life. He's taking away things from them. You know, some of these things affected them. So what happens?
They kill him.
They kill him. There's a conspiracy to assassinate Julius Caesar, and he is killed. Now, before that happens, there's a guy that comes on the scene that is a member of Caesar's army, and his name is Mark Antony. And he is one of the friends of Caesar who remains a friend. Because, as you know, in the assassination that occurs, one of those assassins was a friend. Do you remember who that was? Have you read the play Julius Caesar? Brutus. What did Julius Caesar say to him? Yeah, which means, and you too, Brutus? You know, you, my friend, you're also stabbing me along with all these others. And as Mark Antony would say in his speech, that was the most unkindest cut of all. So Brutus and Cassius are the leaders of this conspiracy, and they stab Caesar. All of them go up and stab him, many stab wounds on the steps of the Senate, and Caesar dies. Mark Antony is given permission to give the funeral address, and don't know exactly whether things took place as Shakespeare writes in Julius Caesar, but it seems like at least a lot of it is based on history. Julius Caesar, I think, is a very well-written play, and I know that in the sophomore English you read it.
Yeah.
So some of you have read it, and others will. In my opinion, the speech given by Mark Antony as a eulogy for Julius Caesar is one of the best speeches ever written. I know it's in a play, but it still is a great speech. It starts out with, you've probably heard of "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ear." And at the beginning of the speech, Mark Antony seems to be taking the side of Cassius and Brutus, but by the end of the speech, he has turned it around so that the audience now blames Cassius and Brutus. They're seen in a negative light, and so it's just a great speech of persuasion. And what happens is Cassius and Brutus end up running away. Mark Antony gets together with Caesar's nephew and heir Octavian to capture and punish Caesar's murderers. Octavian was the nephew of Julius Caesar, and he adopted him as his son and heir. When all this takes place, the death of Julius Caesar, Cleopatra's kind of left hanging. She's not really a person anybody in Rome likes, and so she flees back to Egypt. So Mark Antony is the one that has the power at this point. He becomes the master of Rome. Octavian, although he had been named by Caesar as his heir, had little power. Cicero campaigned for him, though, and in 43 BC, he was elected consul. Octavian then raised an army and marched against Mark Antony. But instead of fighting, the men came to an understanding. And together with Lepidus, a prominent politician and general, they formed the second triumvirate, the three of them ruling together. Now, part of the agreement was that they would each have certain people killed so that they could maintain their power. And among those killed, unfortunately, was Cicero. Poor Cicero. He helped Octavian, and then he was killed. In all, 300 senators were killed, and 200 other leaders were also put to death. Anybody still writing? Remember, abbreviate. All right, after the death of Cassius and Brutus, the conspirators in the assassination of Julius Caesar, the second triumvirate divided Rome's vast territories, with Octavian ruling the west. So Octavian has this area. Mark Antony ruled the east, and Lepidus ruled in Africa. Antony traveled over into this area, and in the city of Tarsus, Cleopatra came up and hosted a banquet for him. And they met there together. Supposedly, she wanted to show Antony how wealthy she was, and so she took a pearl earring and dropped it in her wine, which then dissolved the pearl. That's how you know whether it's a real pearl or not. You put it in wine or vinegar, and it dissolves. Then you know.
You lose your pearl.
Of course, you lose the pearl, but then you know. Well, she showed that she didn't care that she would lose that valuable pearl, and so she put it in the wine, and it dissolved, and she drank it. In addition, have you ever been to a party and you get little party favors, or you get maybe a little gift yourself for being there?
Yeah.
She did that. What kind of gifts have you gotten at parties?
Candy.
Candy? Anything else? A gift card? All right, you know what Cleopatra gave her party guests? Furniture and gold dinnerware. Well, wouldn't you like to be invited to that party? And so Antony was very impressed with this woman. And so he returned to Alexandria with her. And before long, she became pregnant with twins. The son was named Alexander Helios, which means the sun. And the daughter Cleopatra Selene, which means the moon. So there was the sun and the moon. Well, Antony returned to Rome before the birth of the children and married Octavian's sister, Octavia. That would help to solidify the triumvirate. Cleopatra, however, was pretty ticked off about the fact that Antony had just gotten her pregnant with twins and then went back and married somebody else. Well, Lepidus was soon ousted, and so only the two of them remained, Antony and Octavian. And the marriage of Antony to Octavian's sister Octavia apparently solidified that ruling arrangement. However, Antony decided to divorce Octavia and marry Cleopatra, which enraged Octavian. And so he worked against Antony and read to the Senate a document that supposedly was Mark Antony's will. And in his will, he left Rome to Cleopatra and her children. Well, in reality, Antony had already given away the areas of Armenia, Pontus, Libya, Phoenicia, and northern Syria to Cleopatra's children. But when they heard this will, the Senate became infuriated and ordered Octavian to march against Mark Antony. And they met together at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. Here's a little more information about Antony and Cleopatra. You can see they hadn't seen each other for 4 years, and then once they reunited, they married, even though Antony at that time was still married to Octavian. Cleopatra and Antony lived a lavish lifestyle, named themselves as gods. The people of Rome were outraged and called on Octavian to go to war against him. When Octavian arrived in Egypt, the Egyptian army actually joined forces with him. But we're not there yet. First of all, they have the battle at Actium. You can see Actium is on the western coast of Greece. The navies of Antony and Cleopatra came together there to battle against the navy of Octavian. When it became apparent that Octavian was gaining the advantage, Cleopatra took off with her Egyptian forces, leaving Antony behind. Antony was able to see her purple sails disappearing, and so he decided that there was no point in him sticking around either, and so he also took off towards Egypt. The following year, Octavian, here's a painting of the Battle of Actium. The following year, Antony and Cleopatra were pursued into Egypt by Octavian. At that point, Cleopatra was barricaded in her palace, and she sent word to Antony that she planned to commit suicide. When he heard that, Antony ran himself on his sword and then was brought to Cleopatra, dying in her arms. Cleopatra then was captured by Octavian, who intended to bring her back to Rome for his triumph and to parade her in chains. Cleopatra, however, cheated Octavian of this by killing herself with the bite of a cobra. It's often called an asp. It's a poisonous snake, and it was considered the traditional protector of Egypt. Upon the deaths of Antony and Cleopatra, Octavian went to Egypt to subdue it. After success there, he returned to Rome in triumph, having become the ruler of the world at the age of 31. He did 3 things that won him the love of many people. He used the money, tribute from Egypt, to buy land for army veterans. Again, good idea to keep army veterans happy. Secondly, he forgave everyone who owed back taxes. There's another way to gain friends. Forgive all the back taxes. And then thirdly, he granted amnesty to all of Antony's followers. So now, they've been granted amnesty. They're not going to be punished for being Antony's followers. Now who do they follow? Octavian. He has forgiven them, and so now they become his followers. Any questions about what has occurred here in this Third Civil War? Conclusion. With the advent of Octavian into the place of sole ruler over the Roman expanse, Rome concluded the transition from a republic ruled by representatives of the people to an empire ruled by an imperator, or emperor. These emperors would rule with supreme power for nearly 500 years. And so we began looking at Rome as a city which was established became more powerful, eventually became ruler over Italy, and then the Western Mediterranean, then the Eastern Mediterranean, all the while maintaining a government of a republic where there was a Senate who were representatives of the people who ruled the country. But now we've transitioned into a time where Julius Caesar declares himself dictator, and now his heir, Octavian, becomes the ruler for life of Rome and becomes emperor. And so the republic now has become an empire. One of the results of this rule of Rome over the Mediterranean is what's called Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. As Octavian takes over, there is peace established throughout the Roman world. So many things are able to be accomplished. There's great architecture, not only in Rome, but throughout the Roman provinces. Great buildings are built. There's flourishing trade, because remember, Pompey had rid the Mediterranean of pirates, and the expansion of Rome continues to establish peace throughout the world. And so trade is able to be accomplished. The provinces become more well-governed as the reforms set in place by Julius Caesar continue to go on. And peasants even become more prosperous because of the peace, because of reforms, because the whole world is doing better. That affects everybody. And so the Roman world, the Roman Empire, becomes a place of peace and prosperity. Any questions? All right, we are going to have a test over the Roman Republic on Wednesday. We're going to go over the questions you did in your chapter review on page 93, as many as we can get to today. We'll finish them tomorrow, and then have a review tomorrow for the test on Wednesday. Remember that Friday is when your reading project is due. Question about the reading
If you
project.
already have enough pages for 100%, do you have to do it?
No, just write something telling me, remind me of that.
So I don't have to do it.
You don't, if you've already read 350 pages, and that's already been turned in, just write on your report, I've already read 9 pages, whatever, how many pages, and just to remind me of that. Yes.
For our reading projects, are you supposed to read the whole book? Or do you want to-
Doesn't, you can read part of a book, whole book, books.
Is it my total like already like 900 pages?
It's the pages that you read, not whether it's the whole book or not. All right, and some of you, I may have put notes saying that because you have read so little to now, I don't expect you to suddenly read several hundred pages. I expect you to read consistently with what you have read. So if you have not read very much at this point, I'm not going to accept that you're going to read a way bigger amount than what you've read so far. The point of you having interim reports is to keep you on a schedule. If you choose not to keep on that schedule earlier, I'm not going to let you try to make up with it for it by reading a large amount of pages that you probably are not going to read well, and that I may have trouble believing that you even read. All right, that's the point of that. So read a number of pages consistent with what you have done already. All right, let's look at page 93. Check some of the questions that we have there. All right, number 1. In what ways is it true to say that all roads lead to Rome? Give me one. You should have more than, you need at least 2 here because it says ways. Give me one, Caden.
None of the Romans were the first ones to build the actual road.
It's not entirely true. They're the first ones that built extensive roads or a lot of roads. Other civilizations, remember I showed you a road on Crete that was built by the Minoan civilization. So if your intent was the amount of roads they built, okay, we'll take that. What else?
I said many modern roads are on top of Roman roads now, so they can basically get anywhere.
Okay, so that influence is with us today. What else?
For the military troops to travel.
Okay, how does that Why is it true that all roads lead to Rome?
Because they made it in the roads so that the troops could travel.
Okay, from Rome, I guess is inferred there. Okay?
Rome had conquered such a vast area of land that a lot of it was Roman territory anyway.
Okay, so it was Roman territory that the roads were in. Bill?
People said that the roads reached all corners of the earth.
Okay. And they came from Rome. You could have put too that there was a sense in which all cultures were related to Rome. So the roads led to Rome as far as the cultures of people, civilizations as well. You might have even said that the coming of Jesus was, and the spreading of the gospel was more possible because of all the roads that led to Rome, and eventually the gospel would get to Rome as well. All right, you need to have at least 2 things on that. Any question? Or 2 points. Number 2, outline the 5 steps by which the plebeians gained a voice in the Roman government. I'm going to give you the steps that I have, and then we'll see if you have anything different. First, you should have had, they gained the right to have their own assembly. That's one. Another one is they were afforded protection through tribune's veto, so tribune veto. They also benefited from the written law of 12 tables. Law of 12 tables. They gained the privilege to hold public office. Next, they gained the power to pass laws binding on all classes through the tribal assembly, so the tribal assembly. And you could have put the idea that they became more equal through that equality. Do you have any other steps there that I did not mention? You need to have 5 points on that one. Any other steps that I didn't say?
I had that they demanded a voice by the patricians.
Do you also have the assembly? Okay, we'll let that one.
I said that they gained power by threatening to leave the army when they gained concessions.
Okay, that's a kind of a previous step to these.
So the law of 12 tables one, after continued pressure forced the patricians to put the red on the
Okay, so you described the law of 12 tables, didn't say the name of it. Okay, Bill?
I said they are able to vote now. And that work.
Okay. Caden?
They help the patricians with the burden of war, so they can be sure being representing them.
Okay. Any others? All right, 5 points on number 2. Number 3, you were to make a chart of the 3 Punic Wars, including dates, causes, major events or battles, and results. So first, for the First Punic War, the dates you had should be 264 to 241 BC. That's 1 point. Next, the cause is control of Sicily. That's another point. Major events, you should have had something about Rome's naval tactics or Rome using the plank with the spike on it, something along that line. And that's really the only event that we have there. That's a point. And then the results, Rome gained control of Sicily. And that's a point. So there are 4 points for the First Punic War. Any questions? All right, the Second Punic War was 218 to 201 BC. That's a point. The cause was Carthage's expansion into Spain, or you could have put Carthage attacked one of Rome's allies. Any others?
Would Hannibal's attempt to revenge Carthage work?
All right, we'll take that. All right, remember where we are. We'll continue with this tomorrow and review for the test.